A. Armitage, Armitage, 6140 Midnight Pass Road, apartment 803, Sarasota, Florida. Phone 813-349-1388 at his home, Wednesday, March the 1st, 1989, with Helen Earley of the Oldsmobile History Center. Tape 1 of 2 tapes. Well, Chuck, we're all set. You tell me who you are, and we'll begin from there on your Olds career.
My name, of course, is Charles Armitage. I employed as a GMI student at Oldsmobile in 1939. Went 4 years to GMI.
What were you majoring in?
Majoring in automotive engineering.
Where did you first start at Olds? What department?
It was in the engine plant.
Building.
And we were, at that time, a total manufacturer of almost everything that went into the engine. We didn't buy a lot of parts all over, everywhere. We made everything ourselves. And my first job, I'll never forget it, was a broaching job on an oil gear, in which you had to, this was before the days of OSHA and any great concern about employee safety. And the broach bar was broaching a keyway in these little tiny gears. And you had to drop a gear into a spot where the broach bar came in, and you had to get it out and put another one in place before the broach bar came through again. There was no, and if you didn't do it, you either damaged the broach bar or the piece or your hand. So it was that, at that time, it was that lax. But the training was excellent, and I went, as a GMI student, we had the opportunity to look at every part of the plant. And my eventual job was to be, when I graduated, to be a product engineering design draftsman as a start in the power train group. That never happened. When I completed my training, I was, we went all the way through the plant during the training process. But that was the period of 1939 to 1943, when the war effort was just getting underway. So instead of doing some of the things that students normally would do, many of us were drafted into a training operation. And as students, we were teaching other people, primarily tool makers, people in the skilled trades, to do things that they had never done before from a technical standpoint, so they could be better able to handle the influx of war material orders.
Physically, where were you located?
Physically, it was in the northwest corner of the first floor of Building 64. There was a classroom set up there, and we were a part of the Herald Good at that time was head of the GMI students. And this was an idea of his that we could help the war effort by becoming instructors. And so instead of the normal work period that we had for about 2 years, the first 41 and 42 that this occurred, we were doing a lot of instruction, mathematics, blueprint reading, so that they could upgrade a lot of the skills, and the requirements for toolmakers were so great then that we were kind of a forced draft college for our own mechanical people with an Oldsmobile so that they could do some of these jobs. Primarily our work was munitions, that is guns and shells, shot and shells and rockets. And we proceeded through that, finally got back as a employee at Oldsmobile after leaving, and I went in the Navy, as most of everybody else did. The minute they graduated from GMI, we were drafted, or if your physicals were appropriate, I went into officer candidate school.
When did you go into the Navy?
1945. I was working in methods and layout for, at that time, Walt Campbell. And incidentally, Walt Campbell is still around. He's here. We see each other at GMI, or General Motors alumni doings here on the West Coast. He lives in Clearwater. But at that time, we were involved in plant layout for guns and shells and all that sort of thing until I was drafted. I've been receiving our effort deferments after I got out of GMI. And because I had turned down officer candidate opportunities, I was drafted directly and went into the Navy as a radar technician in 1945. So I did not see active overseas service. And got out of the Navy in 46, and then went back to work in methods and layout work.
In building?
Building 40, up on the second floor, working at that time. Tom Darnton was one of my supervisors. Walt Campbell had shifted to other work. Jim Edwards was there at that time. Phil Monahan, Carl Fisher, some names that a lot of people will remember.
Do you remember some of the titles, Jim Edwards?
Well, he was, my recollection, and Jim was at a recent alumni luncheon down here, in fact the one that Roger Smith spoke at, and he could not recall exactly what Jim's title was, but it was generally the whole methods and layout operation was under Jim's direction at that time.
Monahan?
Monahan was also a little bit in a peripheral activity that later became known as production engineering, but they were closely interfaced because there was a management feeling at that time that the production engineering methods and layout was very, very close-knit in order to make things happen quickly, and it wasn't highly compartmentalized. There were many times when we got each other's way because it wasn't, but it worked and it worked well. At that time, Ditto was a group leader. I was a group leader, and
Remember what you were earning then?
oh no, but I do remember I had a strong inclination when I came back from the service that you see a lot of different people when you are in the military service and hear of a lot of different areas of activity and concern and interest, and a couple of them interested me very much. One of them was an involvement with a military contractor overseas. But Mr. Downey, who was works manager at the time,
Tom Downey.
T.C. Downey, fondly remember him. He decided that he was going to change my mind, and he did change my mind and told me that I had a good future at Oldsmobile, and his prophecy was true. Hired in 1946, and that was my first salary job at $325 a month.
And what was your title then?
I think it was just methods engineering supervisor,
Okay.
something along those lines. That period of time was so busy, and everything was a great push to get back into automotive production.
And you were still located in 64?
No, this is all now in Building 40.
All in 40.
The methods and layout group occupied the second floor in about the middle section of Building 40. The front section was plant engineering, and the back section was, or the southerly section was production engineering, and methods engineering was right in the middle, methods and layout.
Okay.
We were the first at that time, and throughout the post-war period, to use three-dimensional models for layout. And we had a large shop there. I don't know whether it still exists or not, just making models. And it was a real challenge when you came to make models of a manufacturing facility in 3 dimensions. It used to be done all on 2-dimensional flat layouts. And this progressed to a 3-dimensional model, but when you came to multi-story plants, we had to put plexiglass as the floors at different levels, so you could see from the 3rd level down to the 2nd level, down to the 1st level, and make sure it was possible to do what you wanted to do from level to level to level. It was an interesting concept, and we spent an awful lot of our time entertaining the rest of the industry because it was quite revolutionary at the time, explaining how it worked. And I think that's probably one of the things that happened at Oldsmobile that very few people were aware of, that we had a leadership in a lot of areas. This was one of them that I don't think was ever recognized, where the industry learned from us on how to make 3-dimensional model layouts of entire manufacturing facilities. That's testing my memory quite a bit. That goes back a long way, because that was up to that point, I had worked at a great variety of peripheral things, and one of the things that became involved with was production engineering, and I'm trying to remember just exactly the sequence of things. At a point in time, we became greatly involved with the Korean War conflict. It was called many things, but one of our major projects was jet engine components. I have some photographs I'd like to show you of some of that may be part of the missing history of Oldsmobile. But we, in conjunction with Buick, produced a Sapphire jet engine for night fighters and for the Canberra long-range bomber. And this was under license from Curtiss Wright, and Curtiss Wright was also under license from a British firm called Hawker Siddeley. And we had a great amount of trouble converting the English way of doing things to the American way of manufacturing, because many of the blueprints, for instance, would say, see Mr. John Smith at assembly for fitting dimensions. That was all we had to go on. And there was no so many millimeters or so many inches and thousandths of an inch and so forth. So we actually had to take physical parts and measure them every way we possibly could and make our own blueprints. And then we had to check those parts to make sure that they would fit British parts and still be interchangeable. And This was done in conjunction with Curtis Wright, who had the lead license and engineering responsibility. But even Curtis Wright was a bit backward when it came to mass production. We set up our initial jet engine operations in it is now the paint plant. Pardon?
Do you remember the building?
There's a building to the west of Building 90. But before you got to old Building 16, there was an alleyway down through there, and it was a new building. It eventually became involved in making 90mm cannon. We took part of that space and set up the initial jet engine production there. And when I say jet engine, all we were responsible for was the rotating components, the compressor and the turbine. We got so adept at that when we moved the whole facility to what has long since been dropped. We used to call it jet plant on Saginaw Street, and I guess it's Plant 4 now.
Plant 3.
Plant 3, correct, Plant 3. And that was entirely a jet engine manufacturing facility for turbines and compressors. And we were so efficient that Curtis Wright curtailed their production, although they had the lead contract, and so far as the Air Force was concerned, they were supposed to be the prime supplier, and we were the secondary supplier. We being General Motors. Our rotary components were shipped to Willow Springs, Illinois, outside of Chicago. And now, I believe it's a stamping plant now, but at that time it was set up to finish the engine. Buick operated the completion using our rotary components and all the rest of the purchase material, assembled and tested and shipped the completed Sapphire jet engine, J65 engine. The efficiency that Oldsmobile became known was that Curtis Wright started using an occasional, when their production was bottleneck, they would send an occasional order in for 5 or 10 compressors or turbines. And the engines were testing out so much better. The accuracy of the manufacturing from Oldsmobile and the promptness of our delivery, and I learned later the cost, was so different that Curtis Wright could not afford to build them themselves when they could buy them cheaper from Oldsmobile than their actual cost of manufacturing. So we doubled in brass. We was the prime supplier for General Motors Buick, and a secondary supplier to Curtis Wright for other rotary components. An interesting sidelight of that is that there was evidently such a cost disparity that we were all subjected to, all of us that were involved in the jet engine program, to a rather intensive interrogation by GAO about 15 years later. In the
Who is GAO?
General Administrative Office, GOA. It had to do, it's a government office, and they were evidently investigating Curtis Wright's military costs. And when they discovered the fact that they were buying jet engines or components from Oldsmobile, and I only learned this as a result of the depositions that were taken, there was probably a difficulty, and I don't know this with any assurance, there was probably a difficulty in Curtis Wright explaining their charges when they were buying components from Oldsmobile, but charging their prices. This is a surmise on my part. I have no evidence that that's an actual fact, but the point I'm trying to make is that not only has Oldsmobile in certain areas, but long since, I'm sure, been forgotten, we gained many excellence awards. E for excellence, that was a military thing that everybody was proud of. A flag flew many times over Oldsmobile because of the skill of our people. Not all of our people, I mean, the manufacturing people and the engineering people and everybody associated with the whole effort. That was one of the really exciting times of my experience at Oldsmobile because it gave me such an opportunity to go in a lot of different areas, and it served as a springboard for me to. I'd served in a quality control activity, working with many people that are still alive. And, I fondly remember Del McRae and Bob Cook, and we had a real fine operation, a training ground for which enabled me to go on to other things. And then when I don't, for the life of me, remember the exact time, but it had to do with the phase down of the military activity.
Would that have been in the late, early 50s?
Early 50s, because I was transferred to production engineering, sheet metal, and a whole new avenue for me. And I worked with Russ Hansen and Palmer Gustafson, and Ray Redmond was my immediate supervisor. Ray was the production engineer in charge of plating.
What building was that?
This is still Building 40.
Still?
On the east side of Building 40 was part of the chemical laboratories. The front part, the extreme front part of Building 40 was chemical labs. The east side was partially chemical labs and sheet metal engineering, sheet metal production engineering. And then the back corner, that would be the southeast corner, was the big blueprint operation, and we sure turned out a lot of blueprints. That area in Building 40 rather, second floor, under the sheet metal production engineering group, gave me an introduction into plating, electrochemical, and further opportunities to learn. And I might say right here that recently there's been an awful lot of criticism pointed at General Motors internally and externally for a whole lot of faults that are, in my mind, mostly gripes and not really faults. My own experience has been that it was just one opportunity after another. And I had made a promise to myself that when I got out of school, that I was, and came back from the military, I agreed mentally that I would work for General Motors. No longer than 10 years, and then I was going to quit and explore other things and do other, something different, totally different. But I was so happy in my work, and so many things were happening to me, that that 10-year anniversary went by without me even recognizing it. I think it was about year 25 before I realized that I hadn't made my promise to myself to do something else. But to go back to the philosophy of General Motors, I believe to this day that despite all the internal changes that have occurred, that if you focus on the job to be done right in front of you, and not worry too much about all the side issues and things that are happening to other people or other organizations, and do your own job to the best of your ability. Excuse me.
You can shut this off.
I may have been just fortunate to be in the right place at the right time. I'm not going to evaluate that. But well, my good fortune was having been able to go to GMI in the first place and then to become part of Oldsmobile and continue until I retired. I never worked for anybody else. And that wasn't really work. It was just an experience that fantastic. That's the only way you can describe it. The production engineering in sheet metal plating got to be a high output, and again, the quality of Oldsmobile started showing through here, in that we were beginning to do plating for other people.
Who was the superintendent at
Uh,
that time?
oh,
Well, who was your supervisor?
at that time, it was still Ray Redmond, and Ray worked for Russ Hansen.
Okay,
Max Waldowski was in that group with Palmer Gustafson.
that's okay.
And
Downey was still works manager.
yes.
This came under his area.
yeah,
Okay.
and then I left. There was the rocket engine in '49 was a great success, and it just kept going by leaps and bounds of capacity, and we're stretching at the seams, and there was a big push to expand engine plant capacity. And so I was transferred to production engineering of engine group under, the name escapes me. He was an elderly gentleman, just one prince of a guy. Pete Mitchell and I had somewhat parallel jobs. Pete was continuing and continued after I left. Was the main man from a supervisory standpoint on the engine and all other machining, axles and that whole area. And I was kind of on the side because I'd done some field activity, vendor activity in sheet metal. I became involved with the procurement side and some of the developmental side of the engine plant expansion. And for better part of 3 years, it was a matter of processing a whole new engine plant.
Now that was building.
That's still building 40.
Okay.
The back end of building 40 now.
All right.
I've made almost a complete circle of building 40, or the back end of it, starting, when I first got out of school. I never got involved in plant engineering or chemical engineering. I was not ever, but that's about the only thing I did miss. And it took about 2 years to get all of this equipment designed and get all these huge machine tools ordered, built, and on-site and tested. And I will never forget a call from Bob Rollis, who was in manufacturing not as works manager, but working for Mr. Downey, and I was called to old Building 60 and asked if there was any reason that I could see why I shouldn't see if I was capable of making all this stuff work, since I helped get it designed and built and installed, and that was in effect a direction that my job had changed, and I was no longer in production engineering, and I became assistant superintendent for manufacturing in this new engine plant, which was building a renovation of building 28 and building 33 and beyond that, and almost down to the river before. And so from the mid-50s to 61, I was involved in engine manufacturing. Arnold Hansen was superintendent of all engine plants, and he had a heart attack and died, and overnight I became the superintendent for all the engine plants. That responsibility ended in 1961, and I had a call from Tom Darnton. Again, our paths crossed. Tom at the time was a director of purchases. And this was the beginning of the recognition that automobiles had to be made better, had to be designed better, and had to be worthy of a customer, the expectations of a customer. And under Mr. Wolfram, it was decided that there would become a reliability department. And Tom Darnton was head of the reliability department, newly appointed. And Elmer Cole, at that time, had a long history, excellent history in service. And so it was an attempt to join service and manufacturing and purchasing. And it was a well-designed scheme. And use the best talents, or not the best talents, but use the talents of those areas of expertise to focus on a
Doing just fine, Chuck. Right up.
we were to focus on making the product more reliable, and it was given manufacturing had always been in control of had quality control, the inspection department, as one of its own operations. And there was a feeling that this was maybe a bit of conflict of interest. And so manufacturing no longer had any direct control over the quality effort insofar as surveillance and corrective action and that sort of thing. The reliability department, as it was known, was broken into two groups: quality, reliability engineering, and quality control. I had the reliability engineering, and Elmer Cole had quality control.
And then you reported to
Tom Darton, who reported directly to Mr. Downey, I believe.
Okay.
It was kind of I was given a chance to stay in manufacturing.
What?
Or to transfer to this new department and start from scratch and build a whole new activity called reliability engineering. And I saw this again as another opportunity, which it was.
I didn't mean to interrupt you, but I'm going to ask you, what was your actual responsibility? What did you do in the new area?
Well, that was the real challenge, because nobody was thinking in terms of reliability. And so we had to create a whole staff of people, of professionals from zero. The inspection department transferred lock, stock, and barrel to quality control. So that was already a fact of life throughout all of Oldsmobile, but it had new bosses and new thought ideas, new objectives. But reliability engineering, conceptually, its purpose was to make sure that, to the best of their ability, that the product was properly designed to begin with, that it was capable of being manufactured. that it wasn't a test of wills about making something that couldn't be, designing something that couldn't be made, or something like that. Or at least using a lot of statistical controls, quality measurements, to convince either the production engineering people that their equipment was not capable of producing what the engineering department wanted, or making the control of the equipment proving that it was capable of doing a fine job. Manufacturing was not doing their share in keeping the machines clean, keeping them properly adjusted, changing tools when they should, and all that sort of thing. So here was a new kid on the block trying to tell very old organizations of manufacturing and product engineering how to do their business. And it was a tightrope act from the very beginning, because we were not in a position to force anybody to do anything. We had to act as a catalyst. And not everybody is oriented to be a catalyst. They have their engineering side or their manufacturing side, and it's kind of a problem of knocking down tunnel vision is what it turned out to be. That was really an exciting time too, because we were constantly the burr under the saddle, if you will, both in product engineering and in manufacturing. And it took probably from 1961, when the department was created, until, I would guess, late 60s, early 70s, when we were referred to both by product engineering and manufacturing to litigate and to resolve, and to act as a sounding board for the differences. And many times we had to convince product engineering that they'd made something, they'd designed something, but the limits that were possible in a one-piece or two or three-piece sample, we could not do in volume. The sheer complexity of the thing was not worthy of the cost involved, because cost always was a factor. You had to always look at that side of it too. You price at what quality, or quality at what price, I should say. So that became the challenge, and I think it was mastered to the extent that in that period of time, a new department was created in product engineering called reliability. And its function within the engineering staff completely was to do some of the things that we had pointed at, was to do a thorough research job on the practicality of the new product from a testing standpoint. And we never were allowed, as a reliability engineering group, to mandate engineering tests at the proving ground or on their internal testing equipment and prove that this was a durable product or that it was a good sound concept. But then I really believe that the function of the reliability department and the reliability engineering department within that did point the way, and some smart people, among them John Belts in product engineering, saw the wisdom of creating within their own organization something that they could wash their dirty linen in private, so to speak, get the problems out of the way right on the drawing board before they ever released it, so that then there would be less and less of a need for reliability engineering. At the same time that this was happening, customers of the automobile industry were telling everybody in loud terms that your product quality has got to improve, or we're going to buy somebody else's cars. And so what manufacturing then became to a point where they also began to listen very strongly to the things that the reliability people were saying, reliability engineering people were saying about their inability to cope with these engineering designs with the present state of equipment. Either the quality of the maintenance of the equipment itself or the total, it was just not properly engineered.
Do you remember any specific incident on a engineering design?
Well, yeah. One was a very simple thing, and that was, if you will look now, you will find that it doesn't happen anymore. But we always used to put our taillights, on station wagons in particular, in the bumpers. They were down low, and for whatever design reason, which we were never able to quite discover, there was a problem of durability of those taillights. They just could not be properly designed, evidently, to keep the salt and the slush and the ice and the snow from getting up underneath in our typical northern climates and throwing that slush, and the wires would get hooked on, and a whole lot of things would happen, so that the field history of taillights in bumpers was horrible.
I mean, they would cease to function?
They just wouldn't operate because they would corrode, or they would be damaged, because a bumper is a bumper is a bumper. Mm-hmm. And here somebody bangs into the back of you with the taillights on, and those filaments are all hot, and that shock snaps the filaments. I mean, when you think back about it, it's pretty simple to realize, but it wasn't just Oldsmobile. It was all over. Bumpers with taillights in them were not a bad idea. Also, taillights in the deck lid were also a good idea at that time, and there was a lot of that. But every time you'd slam the deck lid, the trunk lid, with the taillights on, those filaments again were subjected to this tremendous shock, and they'd snap. And then they burned, and then they wouldn't light again. So what we now have, of course, is you won't see, I won't say any, but you see very, very few automobiles with the taillights in these vulnerable spots. Either it'll be in the fender that's stable, or in the tail panel, which is stable, but they won't get that bumper shock or that trunk lid shock. Try as we would, it took an awful lot of effort and an awful lot of data to show the difference in durability in the field to product engineering. So they designed away from this problem. So I would say that that things of that type, where we were able to, without, our only objective was to have a better product. We weren't trying to create a fight with anybody, but fight we would have to do sometimes in order to be heard. And it got rather acrimonious at times when we were politely invited to leave. They knew how to design the car, or manufacturing knew how to build it, and that we were in advisory capacity only, which we were. And so, as I said, being a catalyst in that kind of an environment was not only interesting, it was a challenge. And the thing that made it all worthwhile was the day of consumerism, as it dawned on the whole industry to see the change in attitude all the way through the organization. And it had many times It was not the kind of a situation where these attitudes started at the top, where they should have started, and filtered down, but they started at the bottom and worked up. And each time you pushed into the request for more money or more time or better designs or better facilities, you were hitting this cost situation all the time. And that was always part of the consideration. So those, some people looked at them as headaches. It's just, how do you put up with that kind of baloney day after day after day, But it turned out to be very well, not only worthwhile, but my last days at Oldsmobile, we were beginning to break into this area of really improved quality. And it was a result of so many people working together. I started in the quality effort in 1961 and retired in 1980, and all throughout that time, in one way or another, I was involved in quality. And in 1974, Emma Cole retired. And I was promoted to Director of Quality Control. And Don Downey came to work in my place as Director of Reliability Engineering. He was promoted to that job from methods engineering, I believe it was. He was in the old Building 40 group. And when I should go back, when in 1961, when the reliability department became a staff function, all of the product engineering activities in Building 64 on the third floor to the west of the auditorium was cleaned out, and we put in a whole new department up there. We had all, for the exception of the paint facilities for product engineering, which were very expensive and should not be moved. They were on the south side of the third floor of Building 64, and the reliability department stretched from the west side of 64, third floor, all the way through to the auditorium. So we had a lot of office space and no people to put in it at the beginning. But it took about 4 years to staff adequately. It would take us to about 1965. And then in 1974, I went into directly quality control, which is more of a plant activity.
In that same physical location?
Same physical location. And I was still in about, other records would show this, but in the early 70s, Tom Darton was moved to a excellent new job in procurement at the corporate level. And Tom Tompkins, I think Tom's responsibility in product engineering was that of experimental engineer. And under that came all of the product testing in product engineering. And Mr. Metzel, who was president there, is plant manager. I guess that was his title. He had an engineering background, and he felt that the whole department ought to have a stronger engineering flavor. And so Mr. Tompkins was promoted to replace Tom Darton when Tom left. And so from about 68 or 9 or 70 in there somewhere, Tom became director of reliability. And I became involved in a corporate activity about this time under Mr. Tompkins' assistance and direction. Because of this push for quality, the corporation decided that the directors of reliability of all the car divisions and the major component divisions would become an operating committee and an advisory function to the corporation. And so I was, and Tompkins became chairman of that activity. He needed a secretary to keep track of things. And so, in addition to my other responsibilities, I became secretary to the corporate reliability organization. And the first thing that they recognized is that there was no standard of quality for an automobile.
Just for Oldsmobile
So
or among divisions?
all of the directors of the corporation, all the quality or the reliability directors of the corporation, Cadillac, Buick, Pontiac, Chevrolet, GMAC, Canada, overseas, they were all involved in this, and some of the major component divisions. And it said, how do we know how well we're doing unless we have a way of measuring this? We created what was known as a General Motors Uniform Audit. To this day, that organization is functioning. It's changed names, it's changed responsibility areas, but there is still a number, a numerical number that you can relate the quality of that plant's production on a weekly, daily, monthly basis. And that became a very strong point in remuneration of top management as to how their product was doing, because that product quality measurement was also a direct reflection on their field costs for warranty, which is a major cost item. And so to create this standard, we came up with a book. I've got a copy here. If you ever want it, you're welcome to it. It's a copy about 3/4 of an inch thick that details everything that should be right or wrong, or how it should be as the customer sees it. And the cars became, in the plant, audited daily, and meetings were held daily with top management and this is back in the 70s now.
Late 70s?
Early 70s.
Early 70s, okay.
So that management had a feel for how they were doing. They could also look at all the assembly plants under General Motors Assembly Division and see how they were doing. And when times were tough, it got to be a fact of life that if your quality index was high, you stayed in business and you kept your volume up because you were producing a superior product, which means two things: less plant cost and less warranty cost. So that's a way of saying more profit. If you had a plant, whether it be a home plant like Oldsmobile or an assembly plant like Fairfax or Doraville, you would suffer if you had poor quality, because they would take cars away from you and assign them to a plant that had higher quality, to the point that you might take off a shift or you might shut down for a few weeks if your quality was way low. It also had a lot to do with many people's careers, because if the plant, once it found out that it was producing substandard quality, and if things didn't change, and if that problem persisted over an extended period of time, we saw it many, many times when there was rather top-level management changes, strictly from an inability to produce a quality product. And that's what I meant by the exciting times, when you could see the result of all this effort, which I don't know whether this narrative is making it clear or not, but from way back when, the progress towards quality that has been made in the corporation it just didn't happen overnight. That's the important thing. We were able to do the things that we're able to do now because of this trend and all the background information we had that pointed us in the direction. Of course, the Japanese didn't hurt it by their ability to see it more clearly, because we put them in business with all new plants overseas. But the whole concept of quality, I was just pleased to be involved in right up to the point that I retired. I left it with a lot of unfinished business, and it's still unfinished.
What about Mr. Tompkins to work with? What kind of a man was he?
I found it difficult to work for Mr. Tompkins.
Why would you say that, Chuck?
I suspect most of it was personality conflict. My perception of right and wrong is not necessarily his. And that was part of it. And I don't think this will come across very well on the recording, so that may be part of it that we'll wipe out. But his strong orientation to the fact that product engineering could do no wrong. I wasn't playing with a full deck. Some of the prime cards were kept away. And in my job, in quality control, it was extremely difficult at times. I don't think I'm going to say any more than
That's
that.
all right. You mentioned John Belts. Did you work closely with him?
Not closely. John, we had a, what was the name of this well-known development person? We had a lot of classes at Oldsmobile.
Duran?
No, it was long before that. This was in can-do attitudes.
Dale Carnegie?
Dale Carnegie. Thank you. John and I were in the first Dale Carnegie class. And that was my first introduction to John. And he was very, very new in his job. And he was an assistant chief engineer at the time. And we struck a very responsive chord. At least from my standpoint, I had high respect for John. He was an excellent engineer, very thorough, but he was also this kind of a guy that let you have it right between the eyes, if he didn't like what you were saying. And he was also of the same, cut from the same cloth, that if you were a product engineer, you were superior to anything else, and don't question what we do, just do it, kind of a thing. So we had our friction points, which is inevitable. But that didn't lessen my respect for him. He was a fine person.
What about Harold Metzel? Did you work with him?
Not directly. No, see, he went from product engineering to general manager.
Right. Okay.
And at that time, that's when John Belts became head of engineering. And that was at the same time that Mr. Tompkins came over to our group. And they, as staff, as Belts and Tompkins, reported to Metzel. So there was that, and that was about the only interesting times where I worked directly, and this was interesting. Worked directly with Mr. Metzel. He'd frequently call up about 4:30 in the afternoon. He'd say, Chuck, pick me up in the garage. And he said, take me out to find and we'll pick out a car. And he was a great man to do that, and he helped a lot in product engineering from a general manager standpoint. We'd go out and pick a car right off the line, put license plates on it, make sure it was full of gas, and he'd take it overnight. And then I'd meet him down in Building 70 in the executive parking area there, and he would go over this car and tell me what he thought was wrong with it. And some of the things that he would point out, I would tell him that I could tell him that this was a design problem, and that things were underway to correct it, or at least many times I thought they were. I've been told they were. But he wouldn't let it go at that. He'd check the belts and find out, and sometimes nothing had been done, although they'd get down into the bowels of their organization and find out that they were aware of it, but nobody was doing anything about it. So that was about the only interface I ever had directly with Metso, was a chance to, as a director of quality control to the general manager, have his expression of how things were. Well, he got to like the idea so well, and that he mandated that all the staff heads pick up a car. So we had a chore of getting 6 or 8 cars ready every night for them to drive home and drive around or whatever, and then they would report out in it was a new building to the west of Logan Street.
150?
Yeah. Down in the basement of 150, we had a large audit area. We created this audit area down there, bring finished cars in there and go through this uniform audit, and then take an evaluation of all these people that would come in. I remember Bill Hayes from purchasing, and Metso would be there many times, and later on Bob Cook would be there. And several manufacturers, Bob Rollis would be there, somebody from sales would be there, somebody from service would be there, and they would all go over their cars, and we would just quickly walk around the car, and they would point out the things that they saw, or performance things. Maybe in the wintertime there'd be a cold start problem, or a drive right, or whatever. But whatever they were, we'd write those all down, and then we had to report back to Metso what we found, what was the result of that day. He eased off on that later on because the volume of paperwork was so much for us, and he realized that, and he was so busy he didn't even have a chance to read the report. So that didn't last a long time, but it showed an interest, and that same interest was carried on very strongly under Bob Cook too. Things that were worthwhile.
Mm-hmm. Tom Downey, did you work closely with him?
More closely than I realized.
Mm-hmm. What kind of a man was he?
A wonderful man. Very brusque, very hardworking. When we were getting, my experience with Tom Downey, direct experience with him, was during the jet engine program. When we were trying to get things underway, we would be at a point, I remember the first compressor that we put together. It was on a Sunday afternoon, about 5 o'clock, and we were trying some new, kind of revolutionary techniques of putting this complete compressor assembly together, and it involved the process of the best way to describe it, I think, is that if you have a plug and a ring, what were we talking about?
We were talking about Tom Downey.
Oh, during this process, if you heat up a ring and you freeze a plug, they will slide in. If you heat up a plug and freeze a ring, you can't even get it in. That's just simple heat and cold. So what we were doing was taking 13 disc assemblies with all the compressor blades on, a big hoop, if you will, and we're heating that all up. And then we had an aluminum shaft that was about this long, about this big thing, and we were freezing that. In one bang, we shoved all those things on this, hoping to get them all in place before the aluminum started to expand and before the hoops started to shrink. that particular night, which was it started on a Sunday afternoon, Mr. Downey was there watching every step of the way until after midnight that night. And he was interested in a project. Mrs. Downey would go to dinner with him, and he would leave her out in the car, and he would forget about time. And there were many times when somebody would come in and remind him that Mrs. Downey had wanted to see him. Well, it got to be kind of embarrassing because for some reason or other, she did not want to stay home. Or he insisted on her coming along for comfort or for whatever reason. And but his dedication to that kind of effort was just fantastic. Well, as a result of being involved so deeply in that, and at the same time, again, Bob Cook and Del McRae come to mind. We were all involved in this project together. I think it was largely because of his observation of what I was doing that made it possible for me to move around to several different kinds of jobs later on, because it was eventually under Cook and Mr. Downey that I got my promotions into manufacturing in the engine plant. But the funny thing about every time that I was ever moved on a job was not at my request, or was not because I was dissatisfied. In fact, every one of it I can never remember was an absolute complete surprise. And I was actually reluctant in several cases because I had so much unfinished business. So many things yet to do that I felt were extremely important. And I had to express it that way several times. I said, this is a very wonderful opportunity you're presenting. And I said, I'm afraid that if I say no, my chances will be no good in the future. But I said, I got all these things to do. In some cases, it was agreeable that I should maybe finish these up before I made a move. And sometimes that opportunity would disappear, but a greater one would appear later on. So I was just very fortunate all the way through. And yet, it would not be... Mr. Downey was a man that was used to getting his way. And if he called me 10 o'clock at night, he did most of his work between 8 and midnight, I think, and he'd take 2 big briefcases home every night. But that's usually when we were in the, again, this was the jet engine work that I remember most closely associated with him. He'd call me up and say, I think you ought to go to Willow Spring tomorrow morning. There'll be a plane coming, picking up some young people. I'll be at the airport at 7 o'clock, and when you get back tomorrow night, give me a call. And he said, I don't care when it is. I want to know what you found out on this, and this. So I suspect that personal interface did me no harm later on.
And with Bob Cook, you had a similar
Yes.
relationship you mentioned. Can you remember any incidents with Cook?
At that time, when I was with Bob Cook, I was in the engine operation at that time. And Bob was primarily concerned with final assembly. And we were going full blast. And every engine meant another car. And if there weren't enough engines, it was just hell to pay. And many times, because of quality problems, and that, I guess, is how I finally wound up in quality work later on. Many times I became a thorn under Bob's side because I would shut the engine line down because we had problems and we were not going to produce bad quality. And Bob could understand that because Bob had a long history in quality too. And I will give him this, he never told me at any time that I was doing wrong. He gave me all the support he needed, although I knew he was catching heck from
Who
other...
was his supervisor at that time?
Bob Rollis.
Oh, yes.
Both Rollis and Downey came to Oldsmobile from Chevrolet. I mean, Mr. Downey came first, and then Bob came after that. And their experience, I believe, started at Kansas City in Chevrolet operation. But
Rollis, what kind of a man to work with was he?
Fine, just great. Very, very human, very understanding. Just a nice person to be around.
Mm-hmm.
Just top.
You were there, pardon me.
I with the exception of this one person we mentioned, I found that I could get along with just about anybody, and with no problems. I think one of the interesting things that most people don't understand is that at certain levels of an organization, you have to have the confidence of knowing where you want to go and how you want to get there, and be sure of yourself that as you do this, that you're on firm ground. Then when you're challenged, there can be an honest difference of opinion, a professional difference of opinion that does not affect your personal or social relationships with that same individual, providing that he has the same concepts. And fortunately for Oldsmobile, a great number of people have that wonderful faculty. Had, and I still think they do have, an ability to have a good, honest difference of opinion, but quickly close ranks when it comes to getting the job done. And some way there will be some conciliation, and there will be people coming together to get the job done, even though that isn't the way they do it. But at least the job gets done. And, that ability, I think, to see the other fellow's point of view and argue with him, and either persist or back off. I think that's a talent. It doesn't come from the individual; it comes from the environment. And I really believe that about Oldsmobile.
Oh, you retired in 1980.
Yes.
And how many years did you have, Chuck?
Almost 42.
Had you planned to retire, or did you take one of the early opportunities?
I had not planned to retire. At least my plans were maybe 2 or 3 years down the road from when I did retire. I retired at 60, 50, 58 and a half, and I thought probably I would retire 62, if the timing was right. I'll be turned out fine. I was not planning to retire. I was a little bit surprised that not only was the opportunity made, but there was an indication that would probably be in the best interest of the organization, because the organization was definitely trying to shrink. And it got to be at a point where there's some real bright young people where there was going to be a choice. Somebody's going to go. Well, for the reasons that I've already stated, I just about had it with Mr. Tompkins, and so it was not inappropriate, and by so doing, I made it possible for some of the other younger people to stay on that who had been my responsibility to send them to another organization, because we just had to cut heads total within my particular area of responsibility, and so it was a situation where, in retrospect, it was fine. And I do not agree, generally speaking, I do not agree with all the impugning that's going around about in the retirement ranks, about, oh, they've taken this away from us, and they've taken that away from us, and look what you've done to us. And if you stop and see what they've really done to us, it's nothing compared to what it could be, and what if you were in another company where you would have started out, not where you'd have finished up, but you would have started out far less and all the benefits that General Motors had. I would say, as a retiree, that General Motors can be largely faulted on poor communications to its retirees. I feel that strongly, that there isn't Mr. Smith at his recent conference here told us there's 320,000 General Motors retired people. That's a tremendous wealth of purchasing power. But you wouldn't know from the up till now, you wouldn't know that that huge population of people was of any importance at all, as far as the corporation is concerned. And on a personal level, I felt the same way at Oldsmobile, that I thought that our communications were better, really, that I would know about meetings of where there were going to be new car shows, that's it. And I've been used to at least being given the chance to know that there was going to be a show, and then I get a chance to see all the new cars. The hourly employees through the union were always well informed about this, but I think Oldsmobile fell short there.
Yes, I think they're trying to correct
Yeah,
that.
I'm sure they are.
It's too bad.
Yeah. No, I think that I graduated from a fine organization, and I'm proud of it.
Chuck, this has been a great interview. I don't want to keep you any longer, but we covered the territory that I hoped we could, especially the quality control
Okay.
that you were a pioneer in, really.
I want to. I don't know whether, just quickly, I'd like to show you.